Tina Satchwell was the kind of woman people remembered for small reasons. The warmth in her voice when she said someone's name, the way she noticed things others missed, the wilting plant in a neighbor's window, the loose button on a stranger's coat. She carried herself quietly, not because she wanted to disappear, but because she believed kindness didn't need noise to be real. In the quiet streets of Essex, her days followed gentle routines. Mornings began with tea, strong enough to wake the bones, held between both hands as if warmth was something to be protected. She liked the early hours best, when the world felt paused and forgiving. The house was still then. The stairs creaked softly, as if speaking only to her. The walls held years of ordinary living, arguments that ended in silence, laughter that faded into memory, evenings where nothing happened at all. To those outside, her life looked unremarkable. A modest home, a marriage that appeared stable, no public drama, no visible chaos. But ordinary lives are often the most fragile, because no one thinks to look too closely at them. Tina believed in commitment. She believed that love, once promised, was something you endured through discomfort. She was not blind to flaws, she simply chose patience over confrontation. When tension entered the house, she softened herself around it. When voices rose, she became quieter. When distance grew, she tried to close it with understanding. She told herself that all relationships went through seasons, and this was just a cold one. David Satchwell was not a loud man. His presence filled rooms without demanding attention. He spoke carefully, choosing words that revealed little and concealed much. In the early years, that calm felt like safety. Over time, it began to feel like something else, something harder to name. Tina felt it in the pauses, in the way conversations ended before they began, in the heaviness that settled over the house like a fog that never lifted. Still, she stayed. She stayed because leaving felt louder than surviving. She stayed because she believed things could improve. She stayed because hope, once planted, does not die icily. In the weeks before she disappeared, small changes began to surface. Tina withdrew from the outside world, not dramatically, but gently, as if slipping backwards step by step. Calls went unanswered longer than usual. Messages were shorter, plans were postponed and never rescheduled. Those who loved her felt it but could not explain it. A sense of unease crept in, the kind that doesn't scream but whispers. No one heard an argument that night. No neighbors reported shouting. No doors slammed. There were no sounds of violence echoing through the walls. The house slept, as it always had. And then, suddenly, Tina was gone. Not missing in the way people imagine an abandoned car. No frantic goodbye, no desperate note. She did not leave behind chaos. She left behind silence. Her clothes remained folded. Her belongings stayed where they always were. The routines she had built simply stopped, as if someone had pressed pause on her existence. When David reported her missing, his voice was steady. He said she had chosen to leave. He said she needed space. He said she had taken items with her. His story arrived fully formed, complete and unwavering. It did not change with repetition. It did not bend under questioning. It did not carry panic. For Tina's family, the words did not make sense. She was not a woman who disappeared without a trace. She did not abandon people she loved. She did not vanish into thin air. They waited for a call that never came. Days passed, then weeks. Each morning brought hope. Each night ended in disappointment. The house stood quietly through it all. Curtains drawn, doors closed. The staircase remained exactly as it always had, leading upward, hiding nothing, revealing nothing. No one suspected it yet. No one imagined what it would come to represent. As time moved on, the world adjusted in cruel, subtle ways. News cycles shifted, attention drifted. Tina's name became less urgent, at least outside the circle of those who truly loved her. But absence has a weight. It presses on the heart, on the mind, and on the unanswered questions that refuse to fade away. Some disappearances leave behind trails, breadcrumbs of what might have happened, but Tina's left behind only echoes. A chair she used to sit in, a coffee mug she favored. Her presence lingered long after she was gone. Those who knew her felt it constantly, that gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the truth was sealed away somewhere close, somewhere familiar. The most frightening truths aren't always hidden in distant places. They're often buried in the spaces we trust the most. In homes, in routines, and beneath the quiet staircase of that ordinary house, a secret waited patiently, while the world slowly forgot the woman who never said goodbye. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The days after Tina's disappearance moved strangely, as if time itself hesitated to acknowledge what had happened. Police officers came and went, notebooks in hand, asking careful questions that circled the same unanswered center. Where had Tina gone? Why would she leave? Who was the last person to see her? Each question floated through the house and settled into the walls, unanswered. David spoke with a calm that never wavered. He said Tina needed space. He said she had talked about starting fresh. He said she had packed some belongings and left on her own. There was no panic in his voice, no visible fear of the unknown. He appeared cooperative, measured, almost relieved to have an explanation ready. The story flowed smoothly, as though rehearsed, and each time it was told, it came out exactly the same. Investigators are trained to listen not only to words, but to the spaces between them. David's answers arrived too quickly, too neatly. When asked how Tina felt before she vanished, he offered descriptions without emotion. When asked if he was worried, he nodded politely, as if worry were something he understood in theory rather than felt in the body. The house was searched in the early days, but only lightly. Drawers were opened, cupboards checked. Nothing looked disturbed. There were no signs of struggle, no obvious clues demanding attention. It was the kind of home that reassured people, that suggested nothing terrible could have happened there. Ordinary walls, ordinary stairs, ordinary silence. Tina's family struggled to accept the explanation given to them. They knew her patterns, her fears, her loyalty. She was not impulsive. She did not disappear without a word. They spoke her name often, refusing to let it dissolve into the language of the past. They pressed the police for answers, for action, for belief. What they received instead was uncertainty in time. Weeks turned into months. Posters faded. Phone calls slowed. The case settled into a quiet place where hope and despair lived side by side. David remained in the house. Life appeared to continue for him, structured and controlled. He did not move away. He did not change his story. He waited. There is something unsettling about a narrative that never evolves. Truth shifts as memory is tested, as emotion surfaces, as time distorts details. David's version of events did none of that. It stood firm, untouched by doubt or grief. To some, this steadiness seemed like innocence. To others, it felt unnatural. Detectives revisited interviews, replayed recordings, read transcripts late into the night. Patterns emerged. Tina was always described as distant, uncertain, responsible for her own disappearance. The focus never strayed from her supposed choice to leave. There was no space for mystery, no room for tragedy. It was a story that closed doors instead of opening them. Years passed, and with them came a quiet cruelty. Life moved forward for the world, but not for Tina's loved ones. They lived in a state of suspension, unable to mourn, unable to hope. Every unknown woman in the news carried a possibility that was never fulfilled. Every unanswered phone call tightened the ache. The house remained unchanged. The staircase still rose from the hallway, unremarkable and unnoticed. It had become a symbol of nothing at all, which is how secrets survive best, by appearing harmless. When the case was reopened, it was not because of a single dramatic revelation. It was because unease has a way of lingering, because some questions refuse to stay buried. A new set of eyes walked through the house, slower this time, less willing to be comforted by appearances. They measured, they listened, they noticed details others had dismissed. The air felt heavy, not with proof, but with possibility. Beneath the surface of David's unwavering story, something pressed upward, something patient and dark. As investigators prepared to search again, the house waited. It had held its silence well, but silence, no matter how long it lasts, eventually breaks. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. The second search of the house felt different from the first. There was no rush this time, no assumption that the answers would present themselves willingly. Every step was slower, deliberate, guided by a quiet understanding that the truth rarely reveals itself without pressure. The officers moved through the rooms as if they were listening rather than looking, aware that houses remember what people try to forget. The hallway was narrow, the light muted. The staircase rose from the floor with the same modest familiarity it always had. Nothing about it demanded attention, no stains, no cracks, no obvious signs of disturbance. It was precisely the kind of place no one suspects, because suspicion needs contrast, and this offered none. Measurements were taken, notes were written. A hand pressed against the wall beneath the stairs lingered longer than expected. Something about the space felt wrong, not visibly, but intuitively. The proportions were slightly off. The storage area beneath did not align with the rest of the structure. It was a detail easy to dismiss, and for years, it had been. When the concrete was finally examined, the air in the house seemed to change. Tools struck the surface with controlled force, each sound echoing through the silence. Dust filled the hallway. Time slowed, as if everyone present understood that once the surface was broken, nothing would ever be the same again. What lay beneath was not immediately recognizable as truth. It revealed itself gradually, piece by piece, like a confession that could no longer be held back. The remains were discovered quietly. There were no gasps, no dramatic reactions, only stillness, the kind of stillness that follows the end of denial. Tina had never left the house. The realization settled heavily on those present, pressing against their chests. For years, she had been spoken of in the past tense without certainty. Now certainty arrived, and it carried unbearable weight. She had been there all along, beneath the steps of a life that continued without her. News reached her family in careful words, chosen to soften what could never truly be softened. Grief returned in a new form, no longer mixed with hope, but sharpened by truth. There was relief, yes, but it was a relief that hurt, because it confirmed what they had feared from the beginning. The house was sealed. The staircase was no longer just a structure, it became a witness. What had once been ordinary was now unspeakable. Every step taken over it in the years since her disappearance echoed with meaning that could never be erased. David was arrested without spectacle. There was no resistance, no visible collapse. His expression remained controlled, as it always had. The same face that had delivered the same story for years now faced a truth that required no words. Evidence spoke where silence once protected him. As investigators documented the scene, the question shifted. It was no longer about where Tina had gone, but about how long the truth had been waiting, how many mornings had passed above her, how many times had life moved forward while she remained hidden beneath it. The discovery did not bring closure in the way people imagine. It brought an ending, but endings do not heal. They only mark a place where the story can no longer pretend to be unfinished. Tina's name was spoken again, this time with finality, and with the respect she had been denied in life. The staircase stood exposed, stripped of its innocence. It had hidden the truth in plain sight, teaching a lesson as old as crime itself, that the most horrifying secrets are often kept closest to home. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt heavy rather than peaceful. People sat close together but felt miles apart, bound by the knowledge that nothing spoken inside those walls could undo what had already been done. Tina Satchwell's name echoed softly as proceedings began, no longer attached to uncertainty, but to fact. David sat still as evidence was laid out, piece by piece. There were no outbursts, no visible cracks in the composure he had worn for years. The truth no longer required his cooperation. It existed independently now, carried by forensic findings, timelines, and the undeniable reality of where Tina had been found. Words, once used to redirect blame and reshape reality, had lost their power. Tina was finally given a voice through those who spoke for her. Family members described the woman they loved, not as a victim, but as a presence that had shaped their lives. Their grief was steady and restrained, the kind that comes from carrying pain for too long. Each sentence carried years of waiting, of hoping, of fearing the worst while refusing to accept it. The verdict arrived without drama. Guilt was confirmed, and with it came the final acknowledgement of what Tina had endured. The sentence followed, measured and firm, designed to protect others rather than to satisfy anger. Justice, in its formal sense, had been delivered, but justice is limited. It cannot restore laughter to empty rooms or return time to those who lost it. The house in Essex stood empty after it was all over. Curtains no longer moved. The staircase remained, unchanged in structure but forever altered in meaning. It was no longer just a passage between floors. It was a reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized, how violence can exist quietly, unnoticed, behind familiar walls. Tina's story did not end with a conviction. It lived on in the awareness it created, in the questions it forced people to ask about control, silence, and the danger of assuming that calm equals safety. Her life became a warning written not in headlines, but in memory. For those who had waited so long for answers, there was no celebration, only release. The burden of not knowing had been lifted, replaced by grief that could finally be named. Mourning, though painful, is honest. It allows love to be acknowledged instead of suspended. In the end, Tina was not defined by the way she died, but by the truth that refused to stay hidden. Her story reminds us that some homes conceal more than comfort, and that truly listening to quiet fear can mean the difference between safety and silence. Justice cannot bring her back, but remembering her ensures that she was never truly lost. Please like, share and subscribe my channel.